He was a billionaire who thought he had everything: private jets, towering skyscrapers, a name that opened every door. To the world, he was success personified. But behind the designer suits and billion-dollar deals was a man completely alone. No love, no laughter, no family by his side, until one day, a stranger asked him to dance, just one dance, and in those few moments, something shifted, something he never expected. How could a simple dance with a waitress in a dusty community hall change the heart of a man who believed he didn't have one left? Richard Langston was a man the world respected and quietly feared. At 68 years old, with snow-white hair always combed to perfection and a stare that could silence a boardroom, Richard was the kind of billionaire who didn't inherit his fortune. He built it brick by brick, dollar by dollar. He grew up in the Bronx, the son of a steelworker and a school janitor. He never forgot the sound of his father's boots hitting the floor after night shifts, or the nights his mother cried quietly over unpaid bills. At 15, he vowed he'd never live that way again, and he meant it. By 30, Richard owned his first hotel. By 45, he controlled dozens across the East Coast. Luxury, elegance, service. His name became a brand. Langston Hotels stood like modern castles in every major city, symbols of comfort and control. But comfort came at a cost. Control had a price. He ran his empire with cold precision. Meetings began exactly on time. Mistakes were not tolerated. Kindness, in his mind, was weakness wrapped in sentimentality. His penthouse in New York City overlooked Central Park, but not once did he ever walk through it. He didn't believe in slowing down. Love, to Richard, was a liability. Emotions were distractions, vulnerability dangerous. He was once married years ago. A woman named Clara, gentle and full of dreams. But Richard's obsession with building something bigger eventually pushed her away. They divorced quietly. Their only son, Daniel, now 34, once adored his father. As a boy, Daniel would wait, eagerly by the door, hoping his dad might come home early, even just once. He never did. As Daniel grew older, he stopped waiting. He chose a different path. While his father chased profits, Daniel chased purpose. He moved to Atlanta and began working with non-profits and grassroots organizations, helping underserved communities, mentoring troubled youth, teaching job skills, fighting for equity. To Richard, this was nonsense. A waste of time. He didn't hide his disappointment. They fought. Words were said. Wounds reopened. And then silence. 4 years of it. No calls, no visits. Not even when Daniel became a father. Not even when Clara passed away. Richard buried his grief the same way he buried everything else. In work, he was surrounded by assistants, lawyers, private chefs, and security. Yet he couldn't name a single person who truly knew him. Still, he told himself he was fine. After all, he had it all. Money, success, control. What more could a man want? And if he ever did feel something, loneliness, regret, guilt, he dismissed it with his favorite line: "If you can't profit from it, it's not worth your time." That was Richard Langston, a king in a golden tower, untouched by the world below. But all of that was about to change. Richard Langston rarely stepped outside his world of luxury and control, but on this particular day, he was heading somewhere unfamiliar: Atlanta, a city far from the cold towers of New York. He had received an invitation he could barely ignore: his granddaughter's 5th birthday. Daniel, his estranged son, had insisted. No fancy gala, no velvet ropes, just a simple gathering at a local community center. Richard had hesitated. His mind raced with complaints. Why Atlanta? Why a community center? Why children running around? And sticky fingers everywhere? This was not the kind of event a billionaire like him attended, but something inside him, a quiet, unfamiliar tug, pushed him to say yes. When Richard arrived, his polished shoes clicked on cracked linoleum floors. The community center was modest, far from the marble lobbies he was used to. The walls were decorated with handmade posters and colorful streamers, hastily taped up by caring hands. Kids darted through the crowded room, their laughter mixing with the smell of popcorn and cake. Some wiped frosting on their faces. Others chased each other in circles. It was chaos, not his style. Richard stood stiffly in the corner, suit impeccable, expression unreadable. His eyes scanned the room, watching Daniel smile as he carried their little girl Emily, glowing in a pink party dress. Then Richard noticed her. Angela. She was serving punch behind a folding table, her movements smooth and effortless despite the hectic scene around her. Angela was in her early 30s, African-American, with a warm smile that could soften the hardest of hearts. Her hair was pulled back in a simple bun, but her presence was anything but simple. As she poured juice for a group of kids, Angela laughed softly, dancing a little with them to a song playing quietly on a portable speaker. Her grace was natural, her kindness visible in every glance she gave to the children. Richard's gaze lingered longer than he expected. He shifted uneasily. He wasn't comfortable here, surrounded by so much noise, emotion, and what he saw as wasted time. In his world, time was money, and moments like this felt messy and unnecessary. He cleared his throat, straightened his tie, and approached the punch table. "Excuse me," he said in a voice that was firm but not unkind. Angela turned, offering him that same warm smile. "Hello, sir. Can I get you something to drink?" Richard hesitated. "Just water, thank you." She handed him a cup, and for a moment their eyes met. There was a softness in hers that Richard hadn't seen in a long time, an openness, a quiet strength that stirred something deep inside him. He looked away quickly, feeling the unfamiliar flutter of discomfort. This was not a place for him, yet as the party carried on, Richard found himself unable to leave. He watched Angela dance again, this time with Daniel and the kids. Her laughter was genuine, infectious. He saw his son smiling without the usual tension between them. A glimpse of the family he'd lost, but Richard still couldn't shake the cold armor he'd built around his heart. He thought about all the years he'd spent chasing success and profits, pushing away the people who mattered most. What if he was wrong? What if the things he dismissed as weakness, the laughter, the love, the chaos, were actually the most important things of all? But before he could answer, Angela's gaze met his once more, this time inviting him not just to drink punch, but to step into a world he'd long avoided. And Richard, against every instinct, felt something inside him crack, something vulnerable, something human. Richard stood in the corner, rigid as ever, watching the party swirl around him. His suit was immaculate, but the tightness in his shoulders betrayed his discomfort. The noise, the laughter, the mess, it all felt overwhelming. He was a man who preferred control, who built his life around order and precision. Yet here he was, surrounded by chaos, feeling out of place, invisible in a room full of joy. Angela noticed. She'd seen Richard earlier, standing alone like a statue, eyes distant and unreadable. A man so used to wearing a mask, she thought. She approached quietly, her steps light but purposeful. Standing before him, she smiled gently and said, "One dance won't kill you, sir." Richard blinked, startled by the kindness in her voice. "I'm not much of a dancer," he replied stiffly, trying to step back. Angela didn't budge. "That's the best part. It's not about the steps, it's about the moment." He looked at her, then to his granddaughter Emily, who had quietly slipped over and tugged at his sleeve. "Please, Grandpa, just one," she pleaded, her big brown eyes shimmering with hope. Richard's gaze softened. For the first time in years, he felt a flicker of warmth that wasn't tied to money or deals. He sighed. The sound, heavy with years of regret, and finally nodded. The soft hum of Motown music filled the room, something timeless, full of soul. Angela extended her hand, and Richard hesitated only a moment before placing his in hers. His fingers were stiff, unaccustomed to such contact, and his movements awkward. The weight of his reputation, his pride and his pain felt like chains. But the warmth in Angela's hand was real. Around them, people noticed. Smiles blossomed. The children stopped to watch. Even Daniel looked on, surprised yet hopeful. As the music flowed, Richard's stern facade began to soften. He looked down at Emily, who was giggling as Angela gently swayed them both to the rhythm. Tequista. Room felt quieter, as if time itself slowed for those few moments. Angela's smile never wavered. She guided him gently, patiently, like a gardener coaxing a stubborn plant to bloom. Richard's shoulders relaxed. His eyes, so often cold and calculating, now reflected something different. A tenderness he hadn't allowed himself to feel in decades. With each step, each turn, a memory stirred. The boy who dreamed of a better life, the father who wished he could mend the distance with his son, the man who had forgotten how to love. For just one dance, Richard Langston wasn't a billionaire. He was simply a grandfather, a human being, and in that moment, everything changed. As the soft Motown melody wrapped around them, Angela leaned in closer to Richard, her voice gentle, yet filled with an unexpected weight. "You remind me of my father," she said quietly, eyes meeting his. He worked himself to the bone, forgot how to love, forgot how to live. Richard stiffened. Her words hit him harder than he expected. He wanted to brush them off, too blunt, too personal, but the truth in them stung deep. For a moment, silence stretched between them, heavier than the music surrounding them. Angela continued. He was so busy building his business, making money, that he missed the moments that mattered, like his children's birthdays, like family dinners, like laughter. Richard swallowed hard, the lump in his throat growing. Could she see through him? Had his cold, calculated exterior betrayed the emptiness he tried so hard to hide? The dance ended, but the moment lingered, like a question left unanswered. The party buzzed around them, but Richard's thoughts were miles away. Later, as guests began to say their goodbyes and the community center emptied, Richard stepped outside for some fresh air. There, under the soft glow of the streetlights, stood Angela, waiting alone by the curb, her shoulders relaxed now but her expression thoughtful. He hesitated, then walked over. "Need a ride?" he asked, the words unfamiliar yet sincere. Angela smiled, surprised but grateful. "Thank you." As they climbed into his sleek black car, the silence between them was comfortable, two strangers bound by a shared, unspoken understanding. The city lights flickered past as Angela began to open up. "I grew up poor, down in Alabama," she said softly, eyes fixed on the window. "Raised by my mom, a single woman who worked 3 jobs just to keep food on the table." Richard listened, intrigued despite himself. Angela's voice carried both strength and vulnerability. "Music and dancing were my escape," she continued. "By day, I teach kids at the center, helping them find their own joy. By night, I wait, at tables just trying to get by." She looked over at Richard, a quiet determination shining in her eyes. "My dream isn't wealth or fancy things," she said. "It's joy, to see those kids smile, to dance without fear, to live fully even when life is hard." Richard felt something inside him shift, a mix of admiration and regret. He'd spent his whole life chasing profit, power, and prestige. But here was a woman whose riches were measured in laughter and hope. For the first time, he wondered if maybe, just maybe, he'd been chasing the wrong things all along. As the car rolled through quiet streets, Richard realized that this unexpected encounter was unraveling the walls he'd built around his heart. Angela's story was more than a tale of hardship. It was a mirror reflecting his own lost humanity, and he didn't want to look away anymore. The morning sun filtered softly through the tall windows of the community center in Atlanta, casting gentle light on the wooden floors, worn smooth by years of laughter and footsteps. The hum of children's voices filled the air, a melody of innocent joy that contrasted sharply with the cold steel towers Richard Langston was used to in his life. Richard stood quietly at the entrance, his tall figure silhouetted against the bright room. For a man who had controlled so much, business empires, wealth, power, this simple scene unsettled him deeply. He wasn't supposed to be here. This wasn't a boardroom, a gala, or a luxury hotel lobby. This was raw life, genuine, messy, unpredictable. And here, among the chaos of laughter and play, was Angela, the woman who had shaken the very core of his beliefs the night before. She moved gracefully, her hands guiding a group of children through the steps of a dance, her smile radiant as the sunlight itself. Richard's eyes landed on a small girl with curly hair and a sparkle in her eyes. His granddaughter, Emily. She twirled awkwardly, giggling as she tried to follow Angela's gentle instruction. The sight struck a tender chord deep inside Richard's chest. He wanted to reach out, to protect, to be part of this moment. But years of distance and silence made him hesitate. Just then, a little boy, no older than 7, skipped up beside Richard and looked at him with wide, honest eyes. "Miss Angela says, 'Dancing lets your heart speak,'" the boy said simply, as if revealing a great secret. Richard's breath caught. "Dancing lets your heart speak." The phrase lingered in the air, echoing louder than any business meeting or contract ever could. For decades, Richard had kept his heart locked away, buried beneath layers of ambition, pride, and unyielding control. But now, here in this community center filled with laughter and light, that heart began to ache for something it had long forgotten. He turned slowly and slipped out the door, needing space to breathe, to think, to feel. Outside, the cool breeze brushed against his face, but the tears came anyway, quiet, unexpected, and raw. For the first time in many years, Richard Langston allowed himself to break down. He thought of the years lost, the moments missed, the love unspoken. He thought of Daniel, his son, and the silence that had stretched between them for over 4 years. The walls Richard had built around his emotions began to crumble, revealing a man desperate to heal, to connect, to be understood. Sitting alone in his car, he wiped the tears away, but the sting remained, a painful reminder of what he had ignored for far too long. He realized that his life of profit and power had come at a price far greater than any balance sheet could show. In the stillness of that moment, Richard made a decision. He would reach out. He would try to fix what he had broken. With trembling fingers, he dialed the number he hadn't called in years. The line rang once, twice, then a familiar voice answered. "Dad?" The word was hesitant, cautious, just like Richard's own heart. "I never learned how to listen," Richard admitted, his voice thick with emotion. "But I want to try. Can we talk?" There was a pause, and then a quiet, hopeful yes. The conversation that followed was awkward and halting, but beneath it lay something powerful, the first step toward forgiveness. For Richard, this was more than an apology. It was a promise to be present, to be open, to love. Outside, the city carried on as usual, unaware that a man who once believed he had it all was learning what truly mattered. The dance with Angela had done more than soften his heart. It had awakened it, and in that awakening, Richard found something worth more than all the billions he had ever earned, a chance to be a father again. After that moment in the car, something inside Richard Langston had shifted irrevocably. The walls he had built around his heart were no longer impenetrable. The distance he'd kept from his family and from life itself began to shrink, step by cautious step. Without fanfare, Richard made a quiet decision. He wanted to give back to the community center, the place that had become a sanctuary of joy and hope, not for recognition or praise, but because it felt right. Through his legal team, Richard funded the construction of a new wing for the center. It was a space dedicated entirely to arts and dance, a place where children could express themselves freely, learn, and grow. But there was one condition. His involvement would remain anonymous. No plaques bearing his name, no public announcements. Just a gift from a man who finally understood what true generosity meant. The center buzzed with excitement when the new wing was completed. The walls were painted bright colors, mirrors lined the dance studio, and polished wooden floors gleamed. Under soft lighting, Angela, the heart and soul of the center, was there every day, welcoming children with her warm smile and infectious energy. And Richard, he began visiting quietly once a month. At first, he stayed in the background, observing from the edges, watching the children learn to move, to laugh, to be free. But slowly, he started to learn their names. Little Emily, his granddaughter, was his favorite to watch. He would sit in the back, her laughter filling the room as she spun and twirled with the other kids. One afternoon, as Angela taught a particularly lively group, Richard found himself drawn into the rhythm. The music played softly, and he allowed himself to smile genuinely, feeling a lightness he hadn't known in years. It was during these visits that Richard's world began to feel less cold, less rigid. Over time, the silence between Richard and his son, Daniel, began to melt away. Their conversations started with cautious texts, then phone calls, and finally, visits. It wasn't easy. Years of hurt don't simply vanish overnight. But both men wanted to try. One evening, Richard invited Daniel to dinner at his penthouse in New York. It was the first time in nearly 5 years they had shared a meal together. The atmosphere was tentative but hopeful. "I'm sorry, Dad," Daniel said quietly over the food, "for everything that went unsaid." Richard looked up, the lines on his face softening. "Me too, son. I never knew how to be the father you needed." They talked for hours that night, not about business or money, but about dreams, regrets, and hopes for the future. They laughed about old memories and made tentative plans to build new ones. Back in Atlanta, Angela became more than just the woman who had shared a dance with Richard. She became family, a cherished friend who brought warmth and light to their gatherings. At birthdays, holidays, and quiet Sunday afternoons, Angela and Richard would dance together, their steps a silent testament to the unlikely bond that had formed between them. Richard often marveled at how a simple moment, a single dance, could transform a life. The woman who once seemed a stranger had become the key to unlocking a heart he thought was lost forever. Through Angela, Richard learned to embrace the messy, beautiful unpredictability of love and family, and in turn, he offered a new beginning. For those around him, a chance for joy, connection, and hope. His empire of hotels and businesses still stood strong, but now, Richard's richest legacy was the relationships he nurtured and the kindness he spread. The community center flourished, a beacon of hope for children who needed it most. And every time the music played and feet tapped across the dance floor, Richard felt a quiet gratitude for the day he let go of control and simply danced. Because sometimes the smallest moments, like one dance, can change everything. A year later, Richard Langston stood at the podium of a bustling fundraiser held in the very community center that had changed his life. The room was filled with supporters, volunteers and families touched by the center's work. Richard's voice was steady but filled with emotion as he spoke to the crowd. "I spent 68 years building skyscrapers, hotels and fortunes. But in all that time, I never built a bridge to my own family. I thought success was measured by numbers on a ledger, by profits and power." He paused, looking out at the faces before him. "It took one dance, one woman's kindness, to show me what all my money never could. That love, connection and presence are the true foundations of a meaningful life." The crowd was silent, moved by his words. The final image lingers on the community center's dance studio. Angela teaching a lively class of children, her smile radiant. Richard and Daniel stand side by side, watching proudly. Nearby, his granddaughter spins in pure joy, laughter filling the room. In that moment, everything Richard had once thought he needed had found its true place. Sometimes, the smallest moments change everything.